Have you ever stopped to think about how fragile the society we live in really is? What would happen if, from one day to the next, all the institutions we trust simply ceased to exist? What if suddenly there were no more laws, governments, economic systems, or technology to sustain us? Would we return to a pure natural state, as Jean-Jacques Rousseau imagined, or would we plunge into absolute chaos, as Thomas Hobbes predicted? Jean-Jacques Rousseau, one of the most controversial philosophers of the Enlightenment, believed that civilization is not a cure for humanity, but rather a poison. He argued that before modern society, human beings lived more freely, authentically, and in a morally superior way. But is that really true? Or was he merely romanticizing a past that never actually existed? History has shown that civilizations can collapse at an alarming speed, whether due to wars, extreme inequality, political instability, or even the weight of progress itself. Great empires have crumbled in a matter of years, leaving behind only the ruins of a past that once seemed eternal. But is our modern world protected from the same fate, or are we living in a fragile illusion sustained by rules that could vanish at any moment? In this video, we will explore Rousseau's philosophy and understand how his vision of the past might help us predict the future. In the end, you may realize that we are closer to collapse than we ever imagined. Imagine that, overnight, all the advancements of civilization disappeared. There would be no more technology, no governments, no laws. You would have to hunt for your own food, find shelter on your own, and defend yourself against any threats. Does that sound like a nightmare, or a return to true freedom? The idea of progress has always been seen as something positive. Our society takes pride in its achievements, advanced medicine, modern infrastructure, global communication networks. But has all of this truly made us better, or has it only made us more dependent on a system that could collapse in the blink of an eye? Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed the answer was clear. Progress has not made us happier, only more distant from our true nature. To him, before civilization, human beings lived in a simpler and more harmonious way, free from the corruptions of power, inequality, and the relentless pursuit of status. In his purest form, man was free and inherently good by nature. But then came civilization, and with it, all the problems we face today. Rousseau saw a paradox in the concept of progress. In theory, the more we advance, the more civilized we become. But in practice, civilization has placed new chains upon us. In the past, humans lived in small tribes with direct bonds of cooperation and belonging. Today, we are isolated in our homes, surrounded by millions of people, yet often lonelier than ever. Technology has given us access to unlimited knowledge, but it has also filled us with anxiety and dependence. Money has allowed us to exchange goods efficiently, but it has also created inequalities so vast that a small group of people controls more wealth than billions combined. We have built massive cities, yet at the same time, we have destroyed the nature around us. If this is progress, are we truly improving, or are we just making our problems increasingly complex? One of the great ironies of progress is that the more we advance, the more we fear losing everything. Ancient societies did not worry about collapse because their way of life was resilient and simple. If a tribe lost its territory, it simply moved elsewhere. If a harvest failed one year, they hunted more. But today, if a global collapse were to happen, most people wouldn't even know how to start a fire. Progress has given us comfort, but it has also made us vulnerable. We depend on massive systems for everything. Food, water, security. Our very survival has been outsourced to institutions that can fail. In the past, a single catastrophic event could wipe out an entire civilization, and today would be no different. Civilization gives us the illusion that we have everything under control. We believe our institutions are solid, our laws unbreakable, and that collapse is a thing of the past. But history proves that such confidence can be dangerously naive. Great empires have fallen in ways that once seemed impossible, and always before the fall, their citizens believed they were safe. The Roman Empire ruled the world for centuries, yet it crumbled under internal corruption and overconfidence. Advanced civilizations like the Mayans and the Aztecs disappeared due to ecological and social crises. The 20th century saw two devastating world wars, even in an era supposedly enlightened by progress. The truth is that no matter how much we try to control the world around us, it remains unpredictable. Rousseau teaches us that progress can be a dangerous illusion if we fail to recognize its fragility. If we forget that our society, no matter how advanced it seems, is still built on fragile foundations, we may be caught off guard when everything collapses. This is a question impossible to answer with certainty. Progress has given us comfort, but it has also distanced us from our essence. We have built grand societies, yet we have become entirely dependent on them. We have grown richer in resources but poorer in genuine human connections. The paradox of progress lies in its very nature. It always moves forward, but it never truly solves the problems it promises to fix. Instead, it reinvents them. And perhaps that is the greatest illusion of all. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was one of the most revolutionary thinkers of the Enlightenment. However, unlike many of his contemporaries, he did not see progress as necessarily good. To him, civilization was not a sign of advancement, but evidence of decline. The more societies grew, the further individuals drifted from their true nature. Man, originally pure and free, had become a slave to institutions, social conventions, and unchecked ambitions. Rousseau's life was far from easy. Born in 1712 in the city of Geneva, he lost his mother shortly after birth and was abandoned by his father during childhood. His youth was marked by uncertainty and instability, living under the care of different guardians, without a permanent home or a clear purpose. This sense of displacement stayed with him throughout his life, and in many ways shaped his philosophy. Rousseau was never a man who fit easily into society, and perhaps that is why he became one of its greatest critics. When he moved to France, Rousseau came into contact with the intellectuals of the Enlightenment, but he soon realized that his ideas ran counter to the dominant thinking of the time. While philosophers like Voltaire celebrated the advances of science and reason, Rousseau questioned whether any of it truly made humanity happier. To him, the answer was a resounding no. Civilization, far from perfecting man, corrupted him. People became more concerned with the opinions of others, more anxious for status, and increasingly disconnected from their true essence. In 1750, Rousseau found a great opportunity to present his ideas. A contest held by the Academy of Dijon posed the following question: has the progress of the sciences and the arts contributed to the improvement of morals? Most people of the time would have responded with a firm yes, but Rousseau took the opposite stance. In his essay Discourse on the Sciences and the Arts, he argued that civilization did not improve human morality, but rather made it more artificial and hypocritical. Modern man had traded his freedom for appearances. For Rousseau, society created an illusion of morality and sophistication, but in practice it merely concealed inequalities and injustices. He saw culture, politics, and economics as instruments that perpetuated the domination of some over others. True human goodness did not require laws or rules to exist. It was natural and instinctive. But civilization distorted this nature, forcing individuals to compete and conform to imposed standards. The central point of Rousseau's philosophy is that human beings are born good, but society corrupts them. Unlike philosophers such as Hobbes, who saw humans as naturally violent and selfish, Rousseau believed that human instincts were driven by self-preservation and compassion. However, as societies developed, these qualities were replaced by envy, pride, and ambition. The desire for acceptance and recognition led people to shape themselves according to the will of others, losing their authenticity in the process. Civilization also brought with it a new form of inequality. In the state of nature, humans were relatively equal, living simply and without significant possessions. However, society created power structures that benefited some at the expense of many. Rousseau saw private property as one of the main culprits behind this transformation. According to him, the first man who fenced off a piece of land and declared, "This is mine," inaugurated social inequality, and others, by accepting this premise, enabled the birth of a system of injustices that would persist for centuries. But if civilization corrupted humanity, was there a way to reverse this process? Rousseau did not propose a literal return to the state of nature. He knew this was impossible. However, he believed that society could be rebuilt in a fairer and more balanced way. This idea became the foundation of his work, The Social Contract, in which he argued that laws and institutions should serve the common good rather than the interests of an elite. To him, the only way to create a truly just society was to ensure that power belonged to the people and that decisions were made based on the general will. Rousseau's influence was overwhelming. His ideas inspired revolutionary movements such as the French Revolution, which sought to overthrow aristocratic privileges in the name of liberty and equality. However, his vision of society also faced strong criticism. Many argued that he was overly idealistic, underestimating the complexity of human nature and the necessity of certain structures to maintain order. Additionally, the concept of the general will, where collective interest prevails over individual desires, could easily be used to justify totalitarian regimes. Even so, Rousseau's critique of civilization remains extremely relevant. In a world where appearances are valued more than essence, where success is measured by the accumulation of wealth, and where social media amplifies the obsession with external validation, his vision seems more relevant than ever. Are we truly free? Or do we merely follow the invisible rules of a society that shapes our desires and ambitions without us even realizing it? Rousseau forces us to question whether what we call progress is truly an advancement or just a new form of slavery. Civilization has brought us comfort and innovation, but has it made us better? If we are so trapped by society's expectations and pressures that we can't even be ourselves, then perhaps Rousseau was right. Civilization has not freed us. It has merely replaced our chains with others, more sophisticated and invisible. Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed that before organized society, human beings lived in a freer and more authentic way. He called this primitive condition the state of nature, a central concept in his philosophy. But what exactly does that mean? And does this vision make sense? In the state of nature, human beings were not corrupted by hierarchies, private property, or artificial desires. They lived in small communities or even alone, hunting, gathering, and surviving without the need to compete with others for status or wealth. Rousseau saw this period as an era of freedom and equality, where natural instincts, such as self-preservation and compassion, were enough to maintain balance. This concept connects to the famous idea of the noble savage, which argues that human beings before civilization were essentially good and peaceful, unlike the pessimistic view of philosophers like Thomas Hobbes, who believed that life without government would be a constant war of all against all. Rousseau maintained that natural man lived in harmony with nature and others. According to him, violence was rare because human needs were simple and easy to satisfy. There was no excessive ambition, envy, or desire for domination. These problems only emerged when humans began comparing themselves to one another and competing for power within society. But is this vision realistic? Many scholars argue that the state of nature was never as peaceful as Rousseau imagined. Research on primitive societies shows that conflicts and territorial disputes have always existed, and that violence between tribes may have been as brutal as any modern war. However, Rousseau was not necessarily trying to describe an exact historical past. His goal was to contrast humanity's original freedom with the restrictions imposed by civilization. For Rousseau, the great tragedy was the moment when humans stopped living according to their basic needs and began building a society based on comparison, competition, and inequality. The emergence of private property was one of the key turning points in this transformation. From the moment one man fenced off a piece of land and declared, "This is mine," humanity embarked on a path of no return. The desire to accumulate wealth created divisions between rich and poor, strong and weak, rulers and the ruled. What was once a simple and autonomous life became a game of power and domination. The question that remains is, are we truly destined to live within these complex social structures, or is there still something within us that longs for that lost freedom? The modern world may grant us access to almost everything, yet it also traps us in an endless cycle of comparison and dissatisfaction. Rousseau's natural man may never have existed exactly as he described, but his critique of civilization's impact remains remarkably relevant. If civilization has corrupted human beings, how can we organize a fairer society? Rousseau believed that the answer lay in what he called the social contract, a theory about how people should come together to form a community without giving up their individual freedom. But can this idea work in practice, or is it just an unattainable utopia? For Rousseau, society should not be a system of domination where a few govern and many obey. On the contrary, he argued that all citizens should actively participate in political decisions. True power, he believed, should not rest in the hands of kings or aristocrats, but in what he called the general will, the sum of the collective interests of the people. In this way, laws would not be imposed by an elite, but created by the people themselves, ensuring that everyone was equally represented. This idea was radical for its time. While many Enlightenment philosophers saw monarchy as a necessary evil, Rousseau rejected any form of government that placed a small group above the rest. He believed that people should give up certain individual freedoms to live in society, but only on the condition that this society was truly fair and egalitarian. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains, he wrote, denouncing how social institutions turned natural freedom into submission. But can the social contract really work? In small communities, where everyone knows each other and shares similar values, the idea of a general will might make sense. However, in large and complex societies like ours, where millions of people have different interests, this theory becomes much harder to apply. How can we ensure that the general will fairly represent everyone? How can we prevent influential groups from manipulating the system to serve only their own interests? Moreover, Rousseau believed that those who did not follow the general should be forced to be free, a contradiction that raises questions about authoritarianism. If freedom means obeying a set of collectively determined rules, then to what extent does an individual remain truly free? This ambiguity in his theory was later used as justification for totalitarian governments, which claimed to act on behalf of the people while imposing their own agendas. Even so, Rousseau's vision influenced revolutions and profound political changes. His idea of a government based on popular sovereignty helped shape modern democracies and inspired movements against oppressive regimes. The social contract may not be a perfect solution, but it remains one of the most powerful concepts for building fairer societies. The big question that remains is, will we ever be able to balance freedom and order in an ideal way? Or are we doomed to live in systems that will always favor some at the expense of others? Rousseau's philosophy about the natural goodness of human beings and their corruption by society did not go without criticism. One of the main challenges to his view came from Thomas Hobbes, a 17th century philosopher who defended a completely opposite idea. For Hobbes, life in the state of nature was not peaceful or harmonious, but rather a true nightmare, where human beings lived in a constant state of war. Without a strong government to impose order, the world would be ruled by chaos and violence. Hobbes believed that without a central authority, individuals would fiercely compete for resources, security, and power. Human nature, at its core, was not kind, but driven by selfishness and fear. He described this brutal reality in one of his most famous quotes: "Life in the state of nature is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short." To avoid this scenario, individuals needed to give up certain freedoms and accept a strong government, often represented by an absolute monarch, to ensure order and stability. This view directly contrasts with Rousseau's. While Rousseau saw civilization as the source of human corruption, Hobbes saw civilization as the only salvation against savagery and destruction. For Rousseau, progress had distanced man from his true nature. For Hobbes, progress was the only thing preventing humanity from destroying itself. But which of these views makes more sense in the modern world? There is evidence that ancient societies and nomadic tribes lived relatively peacefully, supporting Rousseau's idea. On the other hand, there are also records of brutal conflicts between primitive groups, reinforcing Hobbes's argument. The truth seems to lie somewhere in between. Humans are capable of both kindness and cruelty, and their actions depend on the context in which they live. If Hobbes were entirely right, the absence of a strong government would always result in collapse and barbarism. However, there are societies that have thrived without rigid central control, functioning through cooperation and consensus. On the other hand, if Rousseau were completely right, progress should have made us only more miserable, yet many modern achievements have significantly improved the quality of life. What this philosophical debate teaches us is that human nature is not fixed. We are a reflection of the environment we are placed in. Under certain conditions, we can be compassionate and cooperative. Under others, we may become violent and destructive. The big question remains unanswered. Can we build a society that maximizes our best qualities without awakening the worst? Or will we always oscillate between moments of civilization and periods of collapse? The history of humanity is marked by rises and falls. Great civilizations that once seemed unshakable collapsed quickly, and often unexpectedly. The Roman Empire, the Mayan civilization, ancient Egypt, the Soviet Union, all of these societies reached an impressive level of development, but eventually crumbled under the weight of their own systems. What guarantees that the same won't happen to the modern world? For Rousseau, the collapse of a society is only a matter of time. The further a system distances itself from human nature and imposes artificial structures on its citizens, the more fragile it becomes. Extreme inequality, alienation, and excessive dependence on technology are symptoms of a society that may be on the brink of collapse. In a world where people are constantly compared to one another, where the pursuit of status defines individual worth, and where wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few, the very fabric of society becomes unstable. Modernity has given us comfort and security, but it has also made us more dependent on a complex system that we do not know how to fix if it fails. If suddenly the power supply were to stop, if global supply chains were disrupted, or if an economic collapse struck the entire world, how many people would be able to survive without the structure of society to sustain them? In the blink of an eye, we could find ourselves in a reality where laws and governments no longer hold power, and where human beings, reduced to their survival instincts, might reveal their true nature. Looking at the world today, it is easy to identify signs of fragility. Political polarization is growing, trust in institutions is declining, inequalities are deepening, and environmental crises are intensifying. While some believe we are heading toward a bright future driven by technology and innovation, others warn that we are merely postponing an inevitable collapse. If Rousseau were alive today, he might say that the only way to avoid this fate would be to completely rethink how we organize our societies. He believed that a fairer social contract, based on the general will, could restore some of the lost harmony. But is there still time for that? Or are we trapped in a cycle where the rise of a civilization already carries within it the seeds of its own destruction? The big question isn't whether society can collapse. The history books show us it has happened countless times before. The real question is, when will it happen again? The history of humanity is a constant dance between progress and collapse. We have built grand civilizations, developed incredible technologies, and established complex systems to maintain order. But at the same time, we have created deep inequalities, become dependent on fragile structures, and often forgotten our own nature. Jean-Jacques Rousseau warned us that civilization can be both a blessing and a curse. And looking at the world today, his vision has never seemed more relevant. What can we learn from this? Perhaps the greatest lesson is that no society is indestructible. The arrogance of believing we are safe may be precisely what puts us at risk. Every generation thinks it has mastered nature, controlled the economy, and learned how to avoid the mistakes of the past. But the truth is, history has a cruel way of repeating itself. So the question for you is the world we live in today truly solid, or are we just waiting for the moment when everything will fall apart? If this reflection resonated with you, I invite you to share your opinion in the comments. Do you think Rousseau was right, or do you believe civilization has made us better? I also want to take a moment to thank everyone who has followed along this far. Without you, these discussions wouldn't have meaning. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future content. And if you want to keep diving into deep philosophical reflections, I recommend watching the video that's appearing on your screen right now. In it, we explore another thought-provoking question that might change the way you see the world. But be careful. Once you know the answer, there's no turning back. See you next time.